Welcome to a new video of What Is. And in this video, I'm going to talk about what is a hypervisor. Now, for this video, I highly recommend that you watch my previous video about what is a virtual machine first. It will make this video easier to understand because it builds on top of the previous episode. Now, I will put the link to that video down below and up here. So let's get started and learn what is a hypervisor. I'm Garrett and this is TimberTech. So in this video, I'm going to explain what is a hypervisor. Let's get started. So I got my whiteboard ready. Now this video builds on top of my previous video about what is a virtual machine. And in that video, I briefly mentioned a hypervisor. So let's draw out what a hypervisor is. So just like previous video, we have a computer and let's draw the hardware first. So we have a CPU, we have our RAM, we have our GPU, and we have our network. And the NIC is what gives you your Wi-Fi, and your GPU gives you your screen and graphics. Now, this part is your computer hardware, right? And on top of that, you got yourself your operating system. And in my case, that is Mac OS, which runs on top of my hardware. Now, and just like the previous video, when you install a hypervisor on top of that, like for example, VirtualBox, you can run a virtual machine. So this is the hypervisor, which I will shorten to Hyper-V. What does the hypervisor do? The hypervisor creates and manages the virtual hardware of a virtual machine. So the hypervisor is responsible for managing and creating the fake hardware of our virtual machine. So we got the CPU, the RAM, and we got our GPU and our network. And our hypervisor is responsible of managing that. And what does that mean? That means that it will take some of the resources of our computer, gives it to this virtual fake hardware so that it becomes real. So let's say we have in this real computer, in our laptop, we have 8 CPU cores. And let's say we have 16 gigabytes of RAM. Now, the hypervisor can take, for example, 2 cores and half the memory, like 8 gigabytes, and give that to our fake hardware here. And that is what the hypervisor does. It manages the virtual hardware and allows us to run like a Windows on a virtual machine. Now, this is actually what is known as a Type 2 hypervisor. So this one is a Type 2. And a Type 2 hypervisor means that it manages virtual hardware on top of a existing operating system. So in this case, this hypervisor sits on top of macOS. And that's why it is called a Type 2 hypervisor. And in this case, our virtual machines here, because you can have multiple, they are known as a guest OS. Now, there's also something called a Type 1 hypervisor. Now, what is a Type 1 hypervisor? It does still the same, so it manages virtual hardware and allows us to run virtual machines, but it is a little bit different. So let's get this out of the way. And let's remove our hypervisor. Now, what makes a virtual machine with a hypervisor type 2 and a hypervisor type 1 so different? Well, actually, we also have to remove macOS. So we are removing the operating system, and we are now left with hardware. Now, how does that work? A type 1 hypervisor actually sits directly on top of our hardware. It is also the actual OS. Let's get this nice drawn out. So instead of macOS, a type 1 hypervisor sits straight on top of the hardware, has direct access to the hardware, doesn't have to go through macOS or through Windows or through Linux, trying to request resources. It sits on top of the hardware directly like an operating system. And then it can manage the virtual machines. And that is the difference between a type 1 and type 2. So a type 2 hypervisor would be something like VirtualBox. And a type 1 hypervisor would be something like VMware ESXi or Proxmox. So in this video, I explained to you what a hypervisor is. A hypervisor manages the virtual hardware for virtual machines. And I explained the difference between a type 1 and a type 2 hypervisor. Now, if you enjoyed this video, comment below, like, subscribe, and I see you in the next episode of What Is. I'm Garrett, and this is TheFatRat.